Good evening. We're ready to get started. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. First of all, on Thursday night, Emir Hashem will be having our Daf Yomi shiur at the home of Hirsch Chin, who has opened up his home. He lives on Jerome, and we'll put out the address before that, Thursday night, 8:40, followed by shiur back with Rabbi Robinson. We gave him the week off this past week and happened to have been Zocheh to Rabbi Brazil. If you're interested in hearing, it's on my channel on YouTube as well. You can see the recording there. Thanks again to Rav Tzvi for hosting a wonderful charcuterie board of basar at its finest. A little undercooked for my liking, but nevertheless very tasty. I took an end. No, I'm unsophisticated. Don't follow my lead. That's number one. Number two is that on Shabbos, Daf Yomi is going to be a little earlier than normal. I think it's going to be at 5:15 because we have a family shalosh and I'll have to be there at that time. So we'll start a little earlier. It'll be in the announcement and I will let all of you know. Okay, here we go. We're learning Daf Chav Zayin in Maseches Succah, and we're starting at a new Mishnah at the top of Daf Chav Zayin Amud Aleph. This is a great daf to have some primary Mari Makomos about some basic ideas about Sukkah. So let's get started. Machlokas in the Tanaim says the Mishnah 6 lines down on Chav Zayin Amud Aleph. Rabbi Eliezer Omer arba asrei suudos chayiv adam lechol besukkah achas b'yom achas b'layla. One is obligated to eat 14 meals over the course of Sukkot, 7 days. We live in Chutz La'aretz, so we have an 8th day, but 7 days. And you're supposed to eat 1 meal at night and 1 meal in the day, and multiply that by 7. 7 times 2 is 14. That's the requirement. We'll see the Mari Makomos in the Gemara. But that is his shita. The Chachamim argue, but Chachamim omrim ein l'davar kitzvah. That's not correct. There isn't a fixed number that a person has to eat a certain number of meals on Sukkot. That's not the case. And says the Gemara, chutz mi leila yom tov rishon shel chag bilvad, except for the first night where he agrees even to Rabbi Eliezer that on that first night, yes, there is a formal chiyuv. And that is not subject to your own interests and desires of food. On the first night, we push as much as we can to fulfill the mitzvah. Fine. Ve'od, second part of the Mishnah, ve'od amar Rabbi Eliezer mishelo achal leila yom tov harishon. A person who does not eat their Suda, they don't have an appropriate amount of bread for the Suda on that first night of Sukkot. The halacha is Yashlim b'leila yom tov ha'achron shel chag. Wow, there's tashlumin. We know that tashlumin applies by certain korbanos. It may apply by certain fasts. It certainly applies by davening. This just happened this past week, a certain scenario where two of my kids actually had to say Mar with Tushmon Esters. That happened. So, okay, it's fun. Then under those circumstances, then you have to make sure you know the halachos. So seemingly from our Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer seems to be of the opinion if for whatever reason a person doesn't have that Suda on the first night of Sukkot, they have to do Tashlumin. When is their Tashlumin? It's on the final day of Yontif. And to be clear, that's talking about Shmini Atzeres, which is the next Chag, right? They're all connected. It's in one bunch, but it's Shmini Atzeres. And that is the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer. However, says the Gemara, 12 lines down or so, a quarter of the way down on Chav Zayin Amud Aleph, toward the end of the Mishnah, nope, ein l'davar tashlumin. There is no replacement meals. If you miss the first meal, so be it. You've missed it. You've lost the opportunity. And there's a pasuk that supports this idea that there is no tashlumin. And the Mishnah closes with a pasuk in Koheles me'uvas lo yuchal liskon. If you've made this error, you cannot correct it. B'chesron, if there's something lacking, lo yuchal lehimanos, you cannot be counted. So basically, a double machlokas. Machlokas number 1 is whether or not we say there's a fixed number of meals. Chachamim say 14 to a day. The Rabbi Eliezer says 14 meals to a day. The Chachamim say no such thing, just the first night. And the second machlokas in the Mishnah is whether or not there's tashlumin if you miss that first meal. Yes.
Does that mean that I think it was Rabbi Eliezer, he would hold that Shmini Atzeres is actually part of Sukkot?
No, but he does hold that the tashlumin meal for day 1 goes over there. It's a good question. The Gemara is going to not exactly deal with that question, but in an ancillary form, we'll touch on that. So ask again later today if it doesn't get clarified in the Gemara. So then the Mishnah opens up almost a third of the way down on Chav Zayin Amud Aleph, my time of the Rabbi Eliezer. Why does he say that you're required to have 14 meals? Now, we often let the words flow off our tongue of Teshvu Ke'in Taduru, but really, it's Teshvu is the word in the pasuk, and the drasha is Ke'in Taduru. What's the pasuk? Sukkah Teshvu Shivas Yamim. And the drasha is Teshvu Ke'in Taduru. You should live in the sukkah just like you live in your house. We say it as though it's a phrase, but we should know, as learners, we should know that Teshvu is the pasuk and Ke'in Taduru is the drasha. So Rabbi Eliezer says, The basuka teshvu shivas yamim, it should be like you live in your house. Madira, just like in your house or in your apartment, achas biyom ve'achas balayla. Normally, people eat one meal in the morning and one meal in the evening. Sukkah, the same should be true on Sukkahs too. Achas biyom, achas balayla. So if that's his drasha, that based on teshvu, which we understand ke'in taduru, and therefore we're supposed to have 14 meals, the Rabbanan, what do the rabbis do with this drasha of teshvu ke'in taduru? So it says the Gemara, kedira, it should be like your house. Didn't we just say that? Yeah, but they understand their house a very different way. Madira iboy achil, iboy lo achil. I wasn't feeling well. I didn't eat dinner tonight. I made the choice. It's always up to me. There's no chiyuv to have a meal on Tuesdays. I can do whatever I want. So it says the Gemara, just like in your dira iboy achil, iboy lo achil, af sukkah. The same is true by sukkahs. This is why the Rabbanan push back. The Chachamim say that Rabbi Eliezer got it wrong. Yeah, a lot of people have meals, shacharis and mincha. That's great, but I don't. I only one meal a day. Right, 3 meals a day, 5 meals a day. You got people on certain diets. They have what's called intermittent fasting. They only eat in a narrow part of the day, and then for the rest of the day, they're burning off. They're burning calories. Good for them. But so then, does that mean that for that person, their teshvu kein tadur is supposed to be 5 meals a day all of a sudden? No, your standards are not correct, Rabbi Eliezer. And the Chachamim push against it. Iboy achil, ilo boy lo achil, and the same would be true by sukkah. So says the Gemara, if the Chachamim are of the opinion that you can choose if you want to eat, then how did they say in the Mishnah that by the first night you're mechuyev to eat? If your whole argument is it's kedira, that I'm allowed to eat however I want and I'm not in the mood to eat, then what if on the first night I don't want to eat? Says the Gemara, just about halfway down, ihachi, if the Chachamim are saying that you can be selective about what meals you have, and therefore that's what we learn from the pasuk of Teshvu Kein Taduru. Yachi, if that's true, afilu leile yom tov rishonami. Maybe I should say that on the first night of Yom Tov, it's also selective. I'm not in the mood. Forget about rain. I'm just not in the mood. I don't want to eat a meal. I'm just going to skip the whole meal altogether. Says the Gemara, we can't. And now we're going to be introduced for the first time, I believe in Shas, the first time of the principle of Tesvav, a famous Gzeira Shava between the worlds of Pesach and the world of Sukkot. Amar Rav Yochanan Mishum Rav Shimon ben Yehotzadak Ne'emar kan chamisha asar v'ne'emar chamisha asar b'chag hamatzos. We have one reference by Sukkot where it says the 15th. We have one reference by Pesach where it says the 15th. And here's the drasha: Ma lehalan, just like by Pesach, Laila Harishon Chova, Mikan Va'elach Rishus. Just like by Pesach, the first night is a night of Chova, but all of the remaining days of Pesach, if you never take one more bite of matzah, other than Shabbos, where you have a chiyuv for Shabbos to eat a suda, but on all other days, if you eat nothing else, mutter v'mutter, no problem at all. So Afkan, we should assume the same exact thing is true, because the Gzeira Shava from the world of Pesach to the world of Sukkot is a bridge, and we bring some halachos over from one side to the other. So just like by Pesach, the first night is a formal chiyuv. So to by Sukkot, Afkan here too, Laila Rishon Chova Mikan Ve'elach Rishus. So this explains the sheet of the Chachamim. Remember, the Chachamim pushed against Rabbi Eliezer and said, you think it's 14 meals to a day? It's not really true, because not everybody follows that. It's not a requirement to eat 2 meals a day. So therefore, food is arbitrary. Eat whenever you want. They asked the Chachamim, okay, what about the first night? And they answered, no. The first night, you are mechuyev, but not because of Rabbi Eliezer that you're required in 14 meals, but because of the Gzer Shav of Tesvav. And just like by Pesach, you're obligated to eat matzah on the 15th of Nisan after Tzeisak Chavim. So too over here, you're obligated to eat a meal. Fine. So says the Gemara, a side point, really, because we're dealing with Hilchos Sukkah, but if you're making this Gzeira Shava to explain the sheet of the Chachamim that you're supposed to eat the meal on the first night, V'hasam in Alan, over there by Pesach, how do we know your starting point of your Gzeira Shava? You want to say that the reason that you're supposed to eat on Sukkot on the first night, even according to the Chachamim, is because of Tesvav, because we do the same thing on Pesach. How do you know? V'hasam in Alan, says the Gemara, Amar Kra, Ba'erev tochlu matzos, that at night one is obligated to eat matzah, a reference to the 15. Akasuv kiva ochova. The Torah is very clear in establishing the obligation to eat matzah on the 15th of Nisan, and therefore, once we have our Gzeira Shava, it therefore extends from the world of Pesach over to the world of Sukkot, and therefore, even according to the Chachamim, who say that there is no kitzvah, there's no fixed amount of meals that one is obligated to have, still they are going to be obligated to eat that first meal on the first night of Sukkot. That brings us to the 2 dots, almost 2/3 of the way down. So says the Gemara, Ve'od Amar Rabbi Eliezer. Remember the second part of the Mishnah. What does the second part of the Mishnah say? So if you scan back up at the Mishnah, it says that there was a din of tashlumin, that if a person doesn't eat the first meal on night number 1 of Sukkot, that they're obligated to replace that meal on Shmini Atzeres. So says the Gemara, big halachic issue with that. That doesn't even work. How can you say that? Ve'amar Rabbi Eliezer. What did Rabbi Eliezer say about the 14 meals? Arba esrei seudos chayav adam lechol b'sukkah. You have a chiyuv to eat 14 meals in a sukkah. What was his drasha that we said above? Teshvu ke'ein taduru. And just like teshvu ke'ein taduru in your own house, you eat 2 meals, 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon, so too by sukkahs. But where are you supposed to eat them? What's his whole drasha? It's in the sukkah. So it says the Gemara, achas b'yam v'achas b'layla. But the last yontif that where you're doing the tashlumin, there's no sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. So then if that's true, then how does your initial statement in the beginning of the Mishnah work? You said that your 14 meals had to be in a sukkah and your tashlumin is not in a sukkah. That doesn't make any sense. So says the Gemara, Amar Bira, Amar Rabbi Ami. Bira, Rashi highlights as the name of a person. And Amar Rabbi Ami, he says that in the name of Rabbi Ami, Chazar bo Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer retracted his shita. This is very, very difficult because we don't know what he retracted. And it's actually a machlokas on the page between Rashi and the Balei Tosfos. So what does Rashi say? Rashi's 3 inches above where we are, halfway down, Dibur Hamaschil, Chazar bo Rabbi Eliezer. What does Rashi say that Rabbi Eliezer was chozer from? So Chazar bo Rabbi Eliezer, Eitzel Chachamim, Lomar She'ein L'davar Kitzvah. They undo their whole shita. You're right, there aren't 14 meals. That was their undoing. Now we're going to skip the rest of Rashi. Look at Tosfos. It's Tosfos Dibur Hamaschil Chazar bo, and 6, 7, 8 lines from the bottom of the page. It's 2 lines before the new Tosfos. The Balei Tosfos there say Lekach Nir Lefarish. He asks like 5 questions against Rashi. Lekach Nir Lefarish that Chazar bo Rabbi Eliezer Mima Shahaya Matzrich Sukkah. So the big machlokas Rashi and Tosfos. Does Rabbi Eliezer still hold that you need 14 meals? And yes or no? So Rashi says no. They were chozer bo. You don't need 14 meals, and therefore the tashlumin can be whenever you want because it doesn't have the din of sukkah that has to be returned. That the meal has to be replaced in a sukkah. Mashenke and the Balei Tosfos say he still holds the 14 meals, but he removed the word sukkah from our Mishnah. So that's a big machlokas in how to understand Rabbi Eliezer between Rashi and the Balei Tosfos, where Rashi says that Rabbi Eliezer's the whole first part of the Mishnah scratched out. Mashenke, according to Tosfos, that first Mishnah is kept with its integrity minus 1 word, which is the word v'sukkah, and they remain in a machlokas. So then says the Gemara, 3/4 of the way down, mashlim b'mai. What do you have to do to replace that first meal? Okay, you missed the first meal, you overslept, whatever it is. So then says the Gemara, mashlim b'mai. By the way, what the Gemara doesn't deal with, what if you miss it because mitzvah pater mina sukkah? It was a torrential rain, it was a tornado, whatever happened. What if it's an ones? You still chayiv and tashlumin? That's an interesting shayla. We know by tefillah there are halachos like this. If the reason why you missed davening was accidental, it was a shogeg or an ones, then you do tashlumin. But where it was b'mezid, there's no tashlumin by a tefillah b'mezid. I am intentionally skipping mincha because I'm not in the mood. Okay, so then if that happens, you have no tashlumin. That doesn't work. So then those halachos are not discussed here, and one would require some meforshim, probably Rishonim and Achronim, to discuss that. But how do we do tashlumin? Let's say, and remember that the tashlumin only applies to Rabbi Eliezer. That was the second half of the Mishnah, the machlokas Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim. Rabbi Eliezer held there was tashlumin. So within the camp of Rabbi Eliezer, where there is tashlumin, what did the tashlumin look like? Ilem of the rifta's bread. If you want to say that you're having a bread-based meal, you're already having a bread-based meal. It's Shmini Atzeres. You're chayiv to have a bread-based meal anyways on Yom Tov. Says the Gemara, Suda de Yome Kachil. You're already eating the meal. They're waking another piece of bread. There's zero recognizability, if that's a word. Nothing can be seen. There's nothing that's mukar that you're doing anything different. You're eating a meal. That's not tashlumin. So then says the Gemara, Elamai yashlim b'mine targima, with some sweets, with some candies, something extra that you might not have done, maybe after the meal, but something that's a specific siman l'davar that indicates, yes, I missed the first night of Pesach. Family, we're bringing out a special treat because we messed up on the first day, and that was a big problem. So we're doing our tashlumin. Tanya nami halchi. The Brisa writes the same thing. Im hishlim, that if one is going to do a tashlumin for the first day, b'mine targima yatsa, they can do so with some extra sweets. Shal apotropos shel Agrippas HaMelech. Someone who was in the service of Agrippas HaMelech asked a question as Rabbi Eliezer. He says, you said something in our Mishnah about meals. that you're supposed to have 2 meals a day. So he says that the apotropos, this guard, this helper of Agrippa said, Kigonani, what about someone like me? She'eni ragil le'echol ela suda achas bayom. I only eat 1 meal a day. So is your din of 2 meals a day subjective or is it objective? Is it a magic number or is it specific to the person? Because if this guy only eats 1 meal a day and Rabbi Eliezer's din is subjective, then he only needs to have 7 meals, 1 meal a day, and he should be yotzei. Or do we say it's objective, the number is magic, and therefore you have to have 14? Maybe I should only have 1 meal a day on Sukkot, and I should be yotzei. So Amar Lo, Rabbi Eliezer says back to the apotropos of Agrippa Samelach, to this servant, every day you're living in the palace. You walk around, there's hors d'oeuvres, there's trays of food. You're always stuffing your face before a meal. You eat a lot before a meal, and then you have your meal. And now when it comes to the kvod koncha, when it comes to the kvod shamayim, make it work. Just do it right. Just do the right thing, which is to eat 14 meals. Namely, Rabbi Eliezer was of the opinion that 14 meals was an objective number and not a subjective number. So it's an interesting deal. He held stark that was really the norm, that everyone would hold. You're supposed to eat 2 meals a day outside of Sukkot, and therefore on Sukkot, Teshu Kain Taduru, you should do this. Next, another question, 5 lines from the bottom. Chav Zayin Amud Aleph, says the Gemara, Ba'od Shoalu, another question that was asked, Kigonani, sheyesh li shtei nashim. Let's say that a person is married to 2 women, and they lived in different cities, Achas B'Tveria v'Achas B'Tzipori, and they lived in different cities. Not only that, v'yesh li shtei sukkos, I have a sukkah for each of my families, Achas B'Tveria v'Achas B'Tzipori. So says the Gemara, a question that on its face we wouldn't even understand, but we will understand by the time we turn the page, or once we turn the page. Mahu she'etzeh mi sukkah l'sukkah. What is the din about going from my sukkah in family 1 to my other sukkah in family 2? Is that allowed? Well, we're thinking like, who cares? So a sukkah is a sukkah is a sukkah. By the way, the word ve'epater should be removed from the Gemara, stricken. The Kisvei Yad did not have that word, and it should be removed. So what does Rabbi Eliezer say back to, to the apotropos of Agrippa Samelach? Amar lo, you're not allowed to do that. Why not? Why can't you go? Have you ever eaten out on Sukkot before? I ate 1 meal in my sukkah, 1 meal in my parents' sukkah. We're all over the map. My sister, we're all over the place. So how does it work out? Amar lo, you're not allowed. And what here is a unique sheet of Rabbi Eliezer. You're not allowed to leave your sukkah. That sukkah is home base. And all of your sukkah experiences have to happen in that one sukkah. Shani Omer, kol hayotze mi sukkah l'sukkah, bitel mitzvasa shel rishona. Wild idea. The Rabbi Eliezer says your sukkah is the sukkah. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi just articulates this with still sharper language. The last Rashi on the page, Dibur Hamaska Mitzvasa Shel Rishona, Afilu Yomim Sha'avru Alav, even the days, let's say you're 2, 3, 4 days into Sukkot, you've been using your own sukkah, or let's take the case of the Gemara, you're with your Rebbetzin and Tzipori. Fine. And then halfway through, you're like, okay, I'm going to go be with my other family in Tveria, and you switch. So it says the Gemara, in that case, Kfar Ibdan Lemafreya, even retroactively, the first few days that you spend Sukkot with that family, the Eina Mitzvah. Unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Why is this the case? So says the Gemara, recognizing that we are not all Talmidei Chachamim. I had no idea what this was till I learned it. Tanya, what's the brisa that indicates Rabbi Eliezer's shita? Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer, Omer, Ein yotzin mi sukkah l'sukkah. One is not allowed to go from one sukkah to another. They have to stick with their home base the whole way through. We'll see a story that seems to violate this, and we'll have to answer up for that. But in the meantime, this is the basic din of Rabbi Eliezer, one sukkah. Ve'ein osin sukkah b'chulo shel moed, and as well, one should not build a sukkah on chol hamoed. We'll dig into this in a little bit. All of this is Rabbi Eliezer. But the Chachamim, dissenting opinion, but Chachamim Omrim, that's not correct, Rabbi Eliezer. Yotzin mi sukkah l'sukkah, and we of course paskin this way. The one is not obligated to deal with only one sukkah. They can be in as many sukkahs as they want. The osin sukkah b'chulo shel moed, and as well, one is allowed to build a sukkah. And the brisa concludes with the following line: V'shavin, both Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim agree that she'im nafla shechozeru bona b'chulo shel moed, that if a sukkah does fall down, and that happens here in Chicago all the time, or at least the schach blows off, whatever it is, under those circumstances, the din is that one is in fact allowed to rebuild their sukkah if it fell down during Chol HaMoed. Now, let's analyze this brisa. My time with the Rabbi Eliezer, where does this whole thing come from, that you're only allowed to be in one sukkah? Mehecha tesi. How could that be that you're only allowed to be? This is so foreign to us because we travel all over the place for sukkahs. So it says the Gemara, my time at Rabbi Eliezer, 5 lines down, Chav Zayin with Beis Amar Kra. He says it's based on a pasuk in Chumash. Chag HaSukkos Ta'aseh Lecha Shivas Yamim. You should make a sukkah for 7 days. And there's a mistake in the Gemara, or I should say a variant in the Girsa. It should be Aseh Sukkah L'Shiva. Not Haruya L'Shiva, the Kisvei take it out. There's a long note here. You could read through it. There's different variations of this Gemara, but this version is certainly wrong. It should be Aseh Sukkah L'Shiva. You should make a sukkah for yourself for 7 days. One sukkah. So says the Gemara, if that's the drush of Rabbi Eliezer, and that's why Rabbi Eliezer says home base and only home base, you get one sukkah. So then asks the Gemara, V'Rabbanan, how does the other Shita argue? It's a clean drasha. Like, why would you not say that? Says the Gemara, V'Rabbanan, Hachi Kama Rachmana. Rabbi Eliezer, you misread the pasuk. I say sukkah b'chag. You are allowed to build a sukkah even on Chag, even during Chol Hamoed, not on Yontif. Let's be clear, cannot and never build a sukkah on Yontif. The sukkah is muksa, bona is aser, dozens of problems for sure. But he says you've read the pasuk wrong. It means that you can build a sukkah. And now looking back at our Mishnah, the Bryce at the top of the page, now we understand why their machlokes tied these two issues together. Number one, can you move from sukkah to sukkah? And number two, can you build a sukkah during Chol HaMoed? Those seem like two totally different topics. But the reason why they included them is because they were arguing how to understand the pasuk. And the way Rabbi Eliezer understood the pasuk was, this sukkah has to last for 7 days. And the Chachamim said back to him, you learned the pasuk wrong. The pasuk means you can build a sukkah during Chol HaMoed. So when Rabbi Eliezer quoted his sheet on the very top line, he says, Ein yotzei misukah b'sukkah, and you can't make a sukkah on Chol HaMoed. He was contrasting his understanding with the Chachamim. And that's why the Gemara, the Brisa here at the top of this page, puts together these seemingly two random shitas as it relates to Hilchos Sukkah, one being about whether or not you are allowed to leave your one sukkah and whether or not you can build during Chol HaMoed. So that's how the Rabbanan get out of it. Then the Brisa had concluded with the quote, V'shavin she'im nafla shechozer ubona osabechu lo shel moed. The Brisa had concluded that both Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim agree that if a sukkah falls down on Chol HaMoed, the halacha is that you can rebuild the sukkah. So asks the Gemara 10 lines down, Pshita. I mean, well, of course, it fell down on Chol HaMoed. What are you supposed to do? You got to rebuild. You got to keep the mitzvah. Yeah, but Yontif's coming up. So says the Gemara, Pshita. Says the Gemara, no, it's not so simple. Mahu detema. I might have thought that this new sukkah that I just built is acharisihi. It's a new, different sukkah. I took my collapsed sukkah and I rebuilt it. The Eina. And this is not my sukkah, my 7-day sukkah of Rabbi Eliezer, and therefore it should not work kamash malan. That is not the case. If you rebuild your sukkah, it is still the same sukkah. Now, of course, all of this is only within Rabbi Eliezer because the Chachamim say outright you can rebuild a sukkah during Chol HaMoed. But according to Rabbi Eliezer, Mahu Detema, I might have thought that if you rebuild the sukkah, now this sukkah is no longer the original sukkah. And too bad for you. It's not like you did anything wrong, but you're stuck. You can't fix this problem. Sukkah number 1 is gone. Kamash malan, that when you rebuild your sukkah, it has the status halachically of sukkah number 1. How much of it did you change? Did you replace all the panels? Okay, you got to get into the Rishonim. But the point is that Rabbi Eliezer can be substantiated in this way. And then the Brisa writes about 10, 12 lines down, Tanya Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Kishem she'ein adam yotzei yedei chovas of yom tov harishon shel chag, belulavo shel chavero, a little bit of a nudin, that just like I cannot use your lulav to be yotzei unless I make a kinyan on your lulav. So how do I know that that's true? How do I know that there's a din of lachem, that there's a din of ownership as it relates to a lulav? Because the pasuk writes, "Ulkachtam lachem bayom harishon pri etzadar kapos tmarim mishel lachem." It has to be yours. So just like we know that when it comes to lulav, there's a din of lachem, that it has to be yours. Kach, so too says the Gemara, "Ein adam yotzei dechavas v'sukas shel chavero." This is more a Rabbi Eliezer l'shitaso of the top line from the Brisa at the top of the page. Rabbi Eliezer says one sukkah the whole way through. Here we see the same thing. You can't be in someone else's sukkah. There's a din of lachem. Dichsiv. How do we know that this is true? That there's a din of lachem by sukkah? Says the Gemara, because the pasuk says Dichsiv chagas sukkos tasevach shivas yamim mishelcha. So it seems to be that just like we know that there's a din of lachem by a sukkah, by lulav and esrog, so too there's a din of lachem by a sukkah. That's the shita of Rabbi Eliezer. However, again, all of these are party lines. So like the brisa that we saw above, where there is a machlokes as to whether or not you're allowed to use one sukkah or many sukkahs, Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim respectively, these shitas are going to align. Rabbi Eliezer was also of the opinion that your sukkah has a din of lachem, and because your sukkah belongs to you, only you can use your sukkah and nobody else can, and you can't use anybody else's sukkah because there's a din of lachem. Party line, perfect. The Chachamim or no, the Chachamim say afal pisha amru ein adam yotze de chavas el b'yom tov rishon. I'm asking with you, Rabbi Eliezer, that there is a din of lachem when it comes to the sugya of lulav and esrog. That's for sure. Aval yotze de chavas b'sukkah shel chaveru. That's not the case. That a sukkah is a din of lachem. A sukkah. Any sukkah is valid. You go into a restaurant, hundreds of people use it. It's certainly not yours. You walk into the restaurant, you sit down, and you're done. Perfectly mutter. So that's what he says. That's the machlokas. They agree about lulav and esrog. There's a din of lachem. However, when it comes to the din of a sukkah, there we have a machlokas. Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion that a sukkah is a din of lachem, that it has to be your sukkah only. Masha ein kain, the sheet of the chachamim is that there's no din of lachem, of personal ownership, when it comes to the world of sukkah. And what's the pasuk that the chachamim used to support their shita? Dichsiv, the pasuk writes almost halfway down, Kol ha'ezrach b'Yisrael yeshvu b'sukkos. Melamed, what does that pasuk teach us? That all the citizens of Israel should sit in sukkahs. Says the Gemara, Melamed, it teaches us, Shekol Yisrael ru'uyin leishiv b'sukkah achas. Everyone can sit in one sukkah. But because of the way these drashas played out, the Gemara has a few questions. Here's the first one, V'Rabbanan. According to the Rabbanan, who say that when it comes to sukkah, there's no din of lachem. But what did you do with the pasuk that Rabbi Eliezer used to prove lachem? Says the Gemara, hi, quote, lecha, unquote, my darshebe. Because the way that Rabbi Eliezer learned out that a sukkah has a din of lachem was because the pasuk said lecha. Well, then you have to answer for that. What does the word lecha teach you? So he says, no, the word lecha is to teach you that you can't steal someone's sukkah and use it for a mitzvah. Aval she'ula, but to borrow a sukkah, no problem. Ksiv kol ha'ezrach, perfect. So Rabbi Eliezer has his shita, and the Chachamim has his shita. Everything's clear. Rabbi Eliezer, hi kol ha'ezrach, my avidle. If the kol ha'ezrach is a din that from which we see from the Chachamim that a sukkah can be used by anyone, Rabbi Eliezer, you clearly don't hold of that because you hold that a sukkah is lecha lachem. The sukkah has a din of lachem. Then what do you, Rabbi Eliezer, do with the words of kol ha'ezrach? Hi kol ha'ezrach, my avidle. So he says the Gemara. He answers the Gemara as follows halfway down. Mi boile leger shenis gayer ben taim, the katan shenis gadol ben taim. Let's say that a person completes their conversion in the midst of sukkah. Now, Rabbi Eliezer is of the opinion you can't build a sukkah on Chol HaMoed unless it falls down. But you just became a yid right now. Oh, so Rabbi Eliezer says that's what Kol HaEzrach means. That if you became an Ezrach, if you became a citizen of the Jewish people in the midst of sukkahs, then the halacha is that even according to the Machmir Shita of Rabbi Eliezer, that you're not allowed to build a sukkah in the midst of Chol HaMoed. When it comes to gerus, you are allowed. And as well, the famous discussion of the Katan Shenis Gadel, let's say a baby was born in the midst of Pesach. He was born on the third day of Pesach, right? Sukkot, excuse me. I'm watching your face. Third day of Sukkot. And then his bar mitzvah is on the third day of Sukkot too. So he becomes a bar chiyuv on the third day. He doesn't have a sukkah. He's all by himself. So there too, we say he's chayav in that. The big lumdus of this shiloh of katan shehigdil is by Sfiras HaOmer. That's a big lumdus to say for Achinuch, and the Minchas Chinuch discuss this because tam there's a chakira by the mitzvah of Sfiras HaOmer. Is it one mitzvah or is it 49 mitzvahs? If you say it's one mitzvah, so then you're late to the party and therefore you can't make any brachos. You miss the first 10, 15, 20 days whenever your bar mitzvah is. So katan shehigdil on the 10th day of the Omer, you should not be able to make the brachos for the rest of Sfiras HaOmer if in fact we say that it's one mitzvah. Nebuch, you're late. It's just what it is. You'll get it next year. However, if you say that every day is a mitzvah, then the katan shehigdil should be able to make a bracha. And this is a similar mitzvah ain that. How do we treat mitzvos that have a length of time more than a day? How do we treat a katan that became a gadol after the beginning of a mitzvah? That's this shiloh is being posed here. Rabbi Eliezer says that according to me, and the question only applies to him because the chachamim allow for the building of a sukkah during Chol HaMoed. So that's how he uses the words kol ha'ezrach in order to teach the case of katan she'niskayer ben time, the katan she'niskadel ben time, that we are allowed to build a sukkah, or they are allowed to build a sukkah as they have become bar chiyuva. Says the Gemara V'Rabbanan, The Rabbanan who allow the building of a sukkah and chol hamoed out of the gates, they never argued that. They always said it's mutter. Lo itzrich kra. We don't even need a pasuk, so there's no reason to ask. How do you learn that other din? You're allowed the katan and the ger. They can build it without a pasuk in chumash because it's mutter for anyone to build a sukkah during chol hamoed. No problem at all. Couple of stories. 2/3 of the way down, Chav Zayin Amud Beis, we're going to go to the top of Kav Ches Amud Aleph to the second line. Says the Gemara, 2/3 of the way down, about 10 lines before the wide lines. Tana Rabban, and the rabbis taught us in a brisa. Maisa bereb Eloi shahalach lahakbil panei Rabbi Eliezer Rabbo belud beregel. Rabbi Eloi went to go be Mekabel Panei Rabbo. We're going to learn about this din more formally, but we did learn it already once that there is a mitzvah to be Makbil Panei Rabbo, to see one's Rav on the Chagim. So that's what he did. He went to go see Rabbi Eliezer in the city of Lud. Amar lo Eloi eincha mishov seharegel. So his Rebbe said to him, "You're not so from. You're not being shoves properly. You're not keeping the holiday properly." Shahaya Rabbi Eliezer Omer mishabeach ani es ha'atzlanim shein yotzim mibatein beregel. I prefer everybody stay home. You're not supposed to leave your sukkah. Your sukkah is your sukkah. His sukkah is his sukkah. Don't leave. So says the Gemara, wait a second. He shouldn't have been Makbil Pnei Rabbo. Aini, is that correct? That he should have stayed home and not been Makbil Pnei Rabbo? How can that be? And here is the formal Mari Makom to be Makbil Pnei Rabbo. Ha'amar Rav Yitzchak. Rav Yitzchak was of the opinion, this is quoted in the Rambam Lahalacha, Minayin shechayev adam lahakbil pnei Rabbo beregel. How do we know that a person is obligated to go see their Rebbe on the regel, on Sukkot, and on all of the Shalosh Regalim? Shene'emar, as the Torah speaks about Ha'isha Shunamis, it's actually not in the Torah, it's in the Nevi'im, it's in Sefer Malachim. Madua atoleches elav hayom. Her husband of the Isha Shunamis says, "Why are you going to visit him today? Lo chodesh velo Shabbos. It's not a holiday and it's not Shabbos. So why are you being makbil pnei Rabbo? I don't understand." So says the Gemara, what do we imply from this pasuk Michlal? It seems from the way that the husband was speaking to the wife as to when she was going to be makbil pnei Rabbo, Michlal de bechodesh, that when there's a holiday, v'Shabbos and it's Shabbos, mechayv inish la'akbule pnei ape Rabbe. So if that's the case, we have a stira. We have on the one side Rabbi Eliezer saying stay home, and we have on the other side saying don't stay home, go be makbil pnei Rabbo. Which one's right? So says the Gemara, a beautiful answer. Lo kasha, 3 lines before the wide lines. How do we solve this contradiction in Mari Makomos? Says the Gemara, in one case it is da'azil va'asi biyome. It's appropriate, even within Rabbi Eliezer's camp, who says stay home the whole time. It's appropriate to be makbil pnei Rabbo if you can go back and forth within the same day. That's azil va'asi biyome in one day. However, azil v'lo asi biyome. But if you're going and it's taking too long, it's a 3-day. That's not right. That's not right. Then the din of being makbil pnei Rabbo doesn't apply to you if your Rebbe lives so far away. We live close to Rabbeim. We can all make an effort, bring the mishpacha, go visit the shul rabbi. That's great. That's very appropriate. It's a beautiful idea because we'll be home by 4 p.m. It's easy. Mashain Kain, if it's going to be a very far walk, that should not be done. Tanu Rabbanan, 2 lines before the wide lines. Ma'aseh Rabbi Eliezer.
Talking about just on Yom Tov itself?
Shalosh Regalim. It seems to be Shabbos too from the Gemara, actually. It seems that way. It's not the way.
Intent, we should visit the Rav, huh?
I'm sorry?
Intent, we should visit you too, huh?
No.
Rebbe.
No. I am not giving you my address. No. No, it's supposed to be the posek. It's supposed to be a Dayan, the Chashav Rabbanim of the community of which I am not a part yet. Maybe when I'm older. Probably not though. Tanu Rabbanim, the rabbis have taught us in a brisa. Ma'aseh Rabbi Eliezer sheshavas begalil ha'elyon besukaso shel Rabbi Yochanan beRabbi Lai bekesari va'amr la bekesariyon. So Rabbi Eliezer, of all people, Rabbi Eliezer is the one who says, stay home, stay home, stay home. What was he doing up in Kesari or Kisarion, whatever the name of the city was? That doesn't even make any sense. That's where he had Yontif, but we'll have to speak about that. All of a sudden, the sun started to kick in. Amar Lo, he says to the Rebbe, am I allowed to take a sheet and cover us over because it's very hot? So the Rashi highlights this, that the shaila that the Gemara is asking is, let's just read Rashi because he helps it a little bit better than I can. 3/4 of the way down, 2/3 of the way down. Dibur Hamaschel, Mao She'efros Sadin, says Rashi, litzail, to make shade, shelo tishazpeich, so that you don't get all burned hashemesh. Mi aser mishum mosif al ohel arai b'Shabbos olo. Is there an iser of adding onto an ohel arai on Shabbos, yes or no? That's the question of the Gemara. So back in the Gemara, second line of the wide lines, that was the question Rabbi Eliezer was asking. Amar lo, he changes the topic. He wasn't willing to answer. Total pivot. Did you know that all of the Shvatim, unbelievable, they all had shoftim? Unbelievable. Wow. Question, non sequitur answer. Then he tries again. The sun keeps moving because that's what the sun does, or the earth keeps moving. All of a sudden, piping hot. It's like it's halfway up the sukkah. It's getting very hot. So it says the Gemara, Amar lo mahu she'efros aleh hasadin. What about now? Amar lo, out of left field. Not forget about shoftim. Let's take it to the next level. Even Nevi'im, unbelievable. They were Nevi'im. Shevet Yehuda ben Yamin hamidu malachim al pi Nevi'im, and even they got kings out of the deal. You got David, you got Shaul. So then finally the sun continues. So finally the direct sunlight is hitting the feet of Rabbi Eliezer, Shel Rabbi Eliezer. So what does Yochanan do? Natal Yochanan sadenu pires aleha. So what does he do? He takes a sheet and he spreads it out. That's him showing his psak that it's mutter to be mosif on an ohel arai. It's okay. You're allowed to add to the tent. No problem. That's permissible under the circumstances. So it says the Gemara, Hifshel Rabbi Eliezer taliso la'achora v'yatza. He took his talis and threw it over his shoulder and he's out of here. What was the problem? Take a look at Rashi. Rashi, 6 lines from the bottom. Dibur hamaschel v'yatza. 3 lines before maybe 7 lines from the bottom. 3 lines before the wide lines. He didn't agree with that. He felt that it was usher to be mosif on an ohel arai, on a temporary tent. Fine. So says the Gemara, why was Rav Yochanan skirting the question the whole time? So says the Gemara, lo mipnei shehi fligu b'dvarim. It wasn't to be difficult. It wasn't for any other reason. Ella, he had a very strict policy. Mipnei shelo amar davar shelo shama mipirabo leolam. He never quoted halacha that he didn't hear from his Rebbe's mouth. And he never asked his Rebbe the shaila about being mosif on an ohel arai. And because he never asked his Rebbe about being mosif on an ohel arai, he didn't have an answer. So therefore he didn't answer it. It wasn't being difficult, but he knew what the halacha was on his own because he was matir. He said, I'm going to be mosif on an ohel arai. It annoyed Rabbi Eliezer, so he left, but he knew the din. He just wouldn't paskin it because he felt for the public, because that was his guideline. I only say what my Rebbe teaches me. Then asks the Gemara 5 lines from the bottom, Akashia on the Shita of Rabbi Eliezer. How could you have done this? Hechi avid hachi, of all people. The Amar Rabbi Eliezer, en yotzin mi sukkah l'sukkah. What are you doing? What are you doing? You are literally the person who said that this is not allowed. So says the Gemara, regel acher havoy. It wasn't Sukkot. It was a different holiday. It was Pesach. And there was a sukkah type of structure that they were sitting in. The sun was coming in, and he's like, "Hey, what's the din about being mosif on an ohel arai?" It wasn't Sukkot. It was Pesach. It was Shavuos. And they were sitting in a hut that happened to have had green schach at the top. Okay, that's totally fine. That's not Baal Tosef. Baal Tosef is when we'll discuss that. Is that today? No, not today. Baal Tosef is a separate sukkah. It's not Baal Tosef when you're doing this on Pesach, but on Sukkot, on the day after Sukkot, that would be a big problem. So that was how the Gemara says how Rabbi Eliezer got out of this, is that it wasn't Sukkot. In general, he says that stay home. Stay home. It's time, not time to be away from the family. Stay home. What are you doing? So it says the Gemara, Shabbos Havoy. It wasn't a holiday at all. It was a regular Shabbos. Okay, so now one last quick sugya for the night, and it's not really a different sugya, it's connected. V'tifshot le'mi didei. Why did Rabbi Eliezer ask a shaila to Yochanan bar Ilai about whether or not you can be mosif on an ohel arai? We already have precedent that Rabbi Eliezer himself paskin this shaila, and we learned this sugya probably 5 times already in Maseches Eruvin. So I think it's an Eruvin. Nope. Yep, Shabbos and Eruvin, both. So it says, what's the sugya there? That's not in the Mishnah writes, Pikaka chalon. If you have some type of shutter that covers your window, the way that their windows were built back in the day, they just had a hole in their wall and they would just kind of put, like, I guess the equivalent of plywood over the window to keep birds out, to keep bugs out, to keep people out. So it says the Gemara, are you allowed to close that on Shabbos? Rabbi Eliezer, Omer Bizman Shekashra V'Talui. If it's tied, if there's a rope that's holding up the shutters, so that when it's time to go to bed, you drop the rope, and that's not a problem at all. That's mutter. Poka kinbo. Last line, Kav Zayin Amud Beis V'im Lav. If it's not the case, if there's no rope on it, so then that's not allowed. Then Ein Pokekin Bo. However, v'chachamim omer ben kach uben kach pokekin, they are matir no matter what. What's problematic about this? What's problematic is that isn't this being mosif on an ohel arai? Isn't this exactly what we're talking about? It doesn't sound exactly the same to me. It's not an ohel arai, it's a house. But it does seem that adding an extra covering, according to Rabbi Eliezer, would be usher. And if it's not allowed in a house, it's probably not allowed in the case of the sukkah either. Why didn't he paskin that way? So says the Gemara on the top of Kav Ches Amud Aleph, Hasam hu dimivatel. When it comes to the case of this, when it comes to the case of the pikak, that's what Rashi says, it's mevatel to the house. Aval hacha, when it comes to the sheet that you're using in the sukkah, lo mevatel, where it's not going to become vatel lo. So in such a case, we would not necessarily have said that, and therefore we cannot learn from this sheet of Rabbi Eliezer. We'll stop right here. We'll pick up at the top of Kav Ches Amud Aleph. Wishing you all a beautiful night.